Well, assalamu alaikum and a very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of Perceptive Learning Zone. And in today's video, we are gonna try to expose the modern education system and prove how this happens to be an Illuminati agenda. Right? So, first of all, as we know, we often hear that education is universally hailed as the definitive key to success, right? It is a sacred vehicle that is designed to make us aware of the vast repositories of knowledge, of critical skills, and ethical frameworks that have, shaped human civilization. Now, we engage with it fundamentally because it helps us uncover the true purpose of our existence, right? It enables us to it enables us to progress, evolve, as well as develop our inner potential. Now, however, there is a profound crisis that is looming over the contemporary landscape that, today's education system, it is fundamentally not designed to let you reach real, authentic success. Instead, it systematically manufactures a superficial illusion of growth, giving you this comforting feeling that you are actively learning and becoming more intelligent, while in reality, it aggressively narrows your perception of reality to a highly restricted, managed scope. Now, what we have to understand here, ladies and gentlemen, is that this constriction, it is entirely intentional. One of the most historically effective ways to control a society is to systematically deprive its people of their free thinking ability, right? Deliberately denying them any opportunity to think outside the box. And the modern mass education system, we have to understand that it was not built by humanists or philosophers. It was established and heavily structured by influential 19th century industrial businessmen whose explicit goal was to institutionalize the rest of the society. So, what were they aiming at over here? Let's try to understand that. Well, they sought to turn human beings into highly skilled, obedient workers, engineered to operate their expanding factories, their offices, their corporate subnets. And to achieve this, they very meticulously, they structured schools to produce mindless, compliant workers rather than free-minded, independent thinkers. Now, just imagine a closed-door meeting, fellas, where a group of powerful elites, they sit around a table and they say, quote,
"We need to find a highly efficient way of getting young people to see the world exactly the way we want them to see it, so that by the time they reach adulthood, they are completely following the reality we want them to believe in."
Now, if someone in that room were to ask for the absolute ideal method to, to achieve this level of cognitive dominion, the response would be clear, and I quote one.
"We must build a system where we take children away from their parents at least 5 days a week, all day long, starting at the fragile age of 4 and 5, and maintain absolute control of their minds until they are 17 or 18 years old."
Now, this is precisely what is happening globally today, ladies and gentlemen. We call this, praise the Lord, we call it the modern education system, right? What a load of bullshit. Sorry for my language, but its true sociological mechanism is institutionalized indoctrination. To maintain this absolute control, the system, it develops a series of highly calculated methodologies that are designed to break human originality. What sort of methodologies are we really talking about here? First methodology, behavioral conditioning over enlightenment, right? Now, the system, it intentionally expends massive amounts of classroom time and systemic energy on rigid behavioral conditioning rather than actual teaching. Now, behavioral conditioning, it means using tightly enforced rules, rewards, and punishments to deliberately mold a student's, internal thoughts, right? Their feelings, their overt behaviors, right? The overwhelming majority of school rules, now, they are entirely unnecessary for genuine intellectual development, Rather, they are engineered to make students feel inherently powerless, right? Compliant and structurally subdued, right? This is not about improving the learning environment. It is about establishing a zone of absolute control. What's the second methodology? Well, the second methodology is the weaponization of intergenerational debt. Now, the system, it ensnares young people up to their necks in massive, inescapable financial debt, right? Before they even understand how macroeconomic systems operate, right? I studied A-level economics, but still don't know how to file taxes, haha, right? So young scholars, they spend the most productive decades of their adult lives paying off exorbitant student loans, completely trapped under financial anxiety. They sacrifice their youth and their peace of mind just to be heavily programmed with a corporate system's highly sanitized version of historical events, economics, and science. Right? It makes me recall that saying of the Zimbabwe president or Prime Minister Robert Mugabe, that how do you encourage the upcoming generation to gravitate towards education when you are surrounded by poor graduates and rich criminals? Yeah. So what's the third methodology, ladies and gentlemen? The third methodology is the unspoken school curriculum. Through this continuous exposure, students are forced to internalize a devastating, unspoken checklist that dictates how to survive in this corporate world. Right? Things like, number one, truth comes exclusively from authority. Then they are fed mumbo jumbo like the fact that intelligence is defined merely as the ability to remember and repeat. Number three, that accurate memory and mindless repetition, they are highly rewarded. Number four, non-compliance, original thought, and structural dissent are severely punished, right? As was evident in my case in GQ, right? I mean, GQians who are watching it, if you know, you know. So also conformity, both intellectual and social, is the only path to validation. Now, this structured reality, it validates the sharp critique of the famous American social commentator, Mr. H.L. Mencken. And he wrote, and I quote over here, fellas, that the aim of public education is not to spread enlightenment at all. It is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed a static citizenry, and to put down dissent and originality, unquote. Now, this bleak assessment, what shall I say? It's thoroughly backed by empirical data. There was a landmark psychological study that was conducted at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, and it tracked personality and cognitive changes as children, they progress to the formal schooling system. And the researchers, they uncovered a massive, statistically devastating decline in creativity over time. Right? The data proved that as children spend more years inside the traditional educational machine, they become significantly less emotionally expressive, less energetic, less talkative, and less verbally articulate. Right? They showed a marked decrease in humor, imagination, unconventional thinking, liveliness, and obviously raw passion. Crucially, the study found that schooling actively destroys a child's perceptiveness, rendering them far less apt to connect and far less apt to connect seemingly irrelevant dots, less less capable of cognitive synthesis and deeply unlikely to look at a complex problem from a very original angle. Now, this psychological erosion that I call, it is exactly what occurs as the human minds are forced deeper and deeper and deeper into the system, right? So next up, let's talk about fragmented knowledge and the illusion of intelligence, right? The modern education system, right, it achieves this cognitive flattening by deliberately structuring textbooks and curricula to be as disconnected as humanly possible. Knowledge is strictly compartmentalized into isolated, unrelated chunks, and students are trained to memorize the specific facts within each separate chunk of a subject, just long enough to solve immediate homework problems or pass these nonsensical standardized tests. However, because these pieces are never allowed to melt together holistically in their minds, students are actually deprived of a comprehensive big picture, right? They They never develop the deeply intuitive understanding of a subject that is absolutely mandatory if one wishes to use ideas in truly original and disruptive ways. Consequently, students become highly skilled at executing tasks only in the exact manner that they were explicitly taught. They lose the fundamental human ability to innovate or come up with better ways of doing things, right? Also, you see, I feel ultimately like, being a part of the system myself. I mean, like a lot of y'all who are watching this video, I feel like this is precisely, fellas, how the sausage machine operates, right? I know it's cheesy, but that's what it is, right? Sausage machine. It turns bright, creative children into programmable robots who execute their corporate jobs without ever asking questions. This fragmentation, it explains why modern students are increasingly incapable of independent thought. Why they struggle to form coherent logical arguments. And why international testing metrics, they show some of the worst, despicable, comprehensive reasoning scores worldwide. Even by the narrow, rigid metrics of its own redundant design, I would say the system is failing. It's failing bad, right? When you look closely at the profound boredom that suffocates modern education, when you observe the sheer exhaustion on the faces of students that are carrying their bags to school, right, the root cause becomes undeniable. They are strapped in a state of chronic alienation because they're constantly wondering, man, why am I studying this? Like, what is this for? What is the overarching purpose of all this friction, right? So let's understand the obsolescence of the modern university, right? It is telling, that the most legendary innovators of the modern tech era, ladies and gentlemen, they checked out of the system very early on. What am I talking about here? You talk about figures like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, right? They dropped out of elite universities because they recognized early on that the institutional assembly line was actively misaligned with practical execution and real-world wealth creation, right? Today, if you see, even the leading top-notch tech CEOs and industry founders, they are openly encouraging the students to bypass traditional college degrees, promoting open source learning platforms and portfolio-based validation. They have recognized finally that the vast majority of what students are forced to learn in university classrooms has zero real-world application, and it fails to provide genuine high-tier vocational readiness. There is a very powerful, I would say, undeniable argument that the modern university has become entirely obsolete. Consider my dear viewers, please consider a famous observation by Mr. Alfred North Whitehead, who was one of the greatest mathematicians and philosophers of the 19th and 20th centuries. Whitehead noted that the single most important, globally impactful form of mathematics in the modern world is statistics. And the statistical models, they determine economics, data subnets, we talk in automated marketing algorithms and national policies, blah, blah, blah. Yet, this incredibly vital tool is barely, I would say, it is barely touched in high school. Right, despite the fact that a junior high school student could easily master its core concepts. Now, instead, students are forced into years of abstract geometry and algebra without any context, left sitting at the desk, scratching their head, wondering, what does this mean? Why am I doing this? Right? Why should I care what this crap 2x plus 3x equals? Right? There is no overarching meaning being communicated, comprehended, because there is no longer a coherent educational philosophy that is driving this curriculum, right? Now, historically, every single one of these subjects, right, they possess deep transformative meaning. Now, what am I talking about here? Consider, my dear students, the classical framework of the liberal arts, right? If you ask the average, modern recipient of a Bachelor of Arts degree to define the arts that they are supposedly a master of, they will look at you blankly, right? They're entirely unaware that the word arts, it originates from an ancient root meaning tool. right? It shares its linguistic origin with words like armor and army, representing weaponry and defense. The word arithmetic, it stems from ars metrica, A-R-S, ars, M-E-T-R-S-C-A, metrica. What does it mean? The tool to measure by. Therefore, the classical liberal arts, they were literally defined as liberating tools, intellectual weaponry that was engineered specifically to free the human mind from inherent prejudices, cognitive biases, and superficial conditioning. The liberal arts, it stood in stark contrast to the servile arts vocational training, which were merely mechanical tasks learned to earn a basic livelihood, right? Now, traditionally, I would say tragically, the modern university system, you talk about GK, talk about NAST, LAMS, universities in Pakistan, universities outside of Pakistan, they have almost completely abandoned their liberating mission, right? It has transformed entirely into a hyper-monetized engine of the servile arts. It is no longer, I shall say, a sacred sanctuary dedicated to the pursuit of truth. It has become a transactional market dedicated exclusively to the pursuit of money. And because the contemporary economic system often rewards those who are most adept at structural deception and manipulation, because of that, right, widespread academic dishonesty and systemic cheating have thoroughly infected schools and universities worldwide, right? Now, next up, I want to talk about the single path and left-brained imprisonment, right? See, the modern system, fellas, it enforces its dominance by, hammering a rigid single path through life into the minds of the youth. It is a linear script that is constantly chanting, go to high school, get your diploma, secure your university degrees, do your masters, and find a stable corporate job, homie. Now, the system, it fiercely dictates that if you do not follow this exact sequence, you are an absolute failure. Parents are being weaponized by this narrative, scolding creative children who wish to step off the track. Tell them, they are crazy, or threatening to disown them, or refusing to enter the, and why are they disowning them? Simply because they refuse to enter this, pathetic machine, right? Even when young people recognize this trap, as seen in mass student protests across, I would say, major global cities like London, where the youth, they march against a skyrocketing tuition fee and the burden of lifetime debt. The tragic irony is that after the protest ends, they walk right back into the very same university classrooms, as David Icke once said, right? The only way to break this wheel is to completely refuse to participate in this system, right? So, I feel like what happens is that this, when students object, right, when they claim that, but I won't get a good job if I don't go to university, they ignore the stark reality that millions of overqualified university graduates, are currently packing shelves in supermarkets worldwide. Been there, done that, right? Human beings, they possess an innate, God-given creative ability to build an original life, design independent platforms, and achieve financial sovereignty without processing themselves through this clinical, unfeeling sausage machine. This machinery, it persists because textbooks and educational standards, they systematically twist the facts to present a false, highly sanitized picture of world history as well as science, right? And this systematic conditioning, I'm going a bit scientific here, but bear with me, fellas. The human brain, it consists of two distinct hemispheres connected by a thick neural bridge known as the corpus callosum, right? While we possess this magnificent, balanced, creative, cognitive architecture, the modern world, it trains us to utilize only a tiny fraction of our true mental capacity. The current system is engineered to turn out left-brained prisoners, right? It systematically pumps standardized linear information through schools and colleges directly into the left hemisphere. And when exam time arrives, the system essentially demands that, you just regurgitate every single piece of data exactly the way I gave it to you. If you copy and repeat what you were told well enough, you pass the exam and are deemed successful. Right? However, if an original student now takes that information, processes it through their creative right hemisphere, puts their own unique spin on it, and questions its foundational premises or sees completely through the deception, they are immediately targeted, right? They are labeled as a disruptive influence in the classroom and are systematically graded down, right? To become a mainstream doctor, a prominent politician, an elite journalist, a corporate lawyer, or a certified institutional teacher, you are required to spend your entire youth constantly taking top-down information into your left brain and regurgitating it on demand under these standardized exam papers / toilet papers, right? Now, teachers now are being processed through training colleges where they are taught exactly how to apply this conditioning to the next generation, who are then let loose on innocent children. The entire global infrastructure, it is being run by these left-brain prisoners. Arts, uniqueness, and programs that stimulate original thought, they are systematically cut back in favor of these rigid, standardized curricula. And this is not an administrative accident. You see, it is corely, systematically calculated by the shadowy interests, the Zionists, Illuminati, Freemasons, alien subconsciousness, international bankers, whatever you want to call them. It is systematically calculated by these shadowy interests, right, that design those institutional frameworks in order to completely eliminate human originality. So now what we need to understand is that we need to understand this, I would say, we need to understand this separation from the sacred, right? You see, fellas, when you divorce education from meaning, purpose, and the sacred, you create an incredibly dangerous class of highly educated moral monsters. I repeat, moral monsters. Now, don't take my word for it. History, ladies and gentlemen, it bears witness to the devastating consequences of this separation. Consider the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study in the United States, or the horrific medical experiments that were conducted in Guatemala in the year 1947, right? You had institutional physicians and researchers who intentionally injected innocent, vulnerable human beings with syphilis, with gonorrhea, and deadly diseases, similarly, just to, observe the progression of the infections over time, right? The individuals who designed, authorized, and executed these atrocities, they were not uneducated brutes. They were highly decorated scientists, doctors, and researchers that were produced by the most elite and the most prestigious universities in the Western world. They were the absolute apex products of the modern educational system, the very same Ivy League institutions that produce the financial executives and corporate specialists who systematically rob millions of ordinary people of their home equity as well as financial security. And until we deal openly with the fact that teaching technical skills without teaching higher moral meaning and divine purpose creates highly sophisticated monsters, we will continue to feed a systemic disease that is masquerading as civilization, right? And finally, what's the solution, right? I mean to, dissuade students from, going to university, right? I've been to university myself. I've taught in GK for 2 years, right? What is the solution, right? That is the Islamic alternative, right? We need to seek knowledge for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As simple as that. This civilizational crisis that we just talked about for the past 20 odd minutes, right? It presents a profound and very unprecedented opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, for Muslims and the global ummah to lead an intellectual and spiritual revolution. We are a people who, despite our contemporary challenges, still hold fast to an immutable divine anchor. We possess the timeless guidance of the Prophet ﷺ, who once said in an authentic hadith that one of the signs of the end times is that people will study other than for the love of God, right? In the Islamic paradigm, the acquisition of knowledge is not a transactional tool, ladies and gentlemen, that is engineered to, maximize your corporate capital or secure a cubicle in an industrial office or climb a artificial class hierarchy. It is a mandate, it is a mandatory sacred form of worship, ibadah, right? The ultimate purpose of learning is not to make more money. It is to refine, elevate, and purify the human soul, transforming the seeker into a deeply conscious, moral, and an elevated human being. We do not pursue learning for learning's sake, not for the sake of corporate utility, but we pursue knowledge entirely for securing the grace and love of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So when knowledge is reunited with its divine origin, the artificial boundaries that are constructed by the modern school system, they dissolve completely. And the wide, so I feel like that being said and done, to conclude that it is time now. It is high time, ladies and gentlemen, that we completely reject this unfeeling left-brain sausage machine of modern education, and we must reestablish the true sacred roots of learning and anchor our academic ambitions in this divine purpose and step boldly forward as true liberated thinkers, who refuse to, I would say, who refuse to let their potential be managed by a system that was built to keep them asleep, right? That'll be all for now. Thank you very much for listening. You've been a lovely audience. Your host, mentor, Hamza Nasser, is going to be back with more content in the near future. God bless you all and have a lovely night. Assalamu alaikum.